Did he teach you how to do the video?
No.
Okay. So.
I have a couple. I don't know if I'm going to show them.
Okay, so if you want to show them, so you'll
For
be
instance, there's one here.
here. Okay. Let's go into current slide. Okay, so it's projecting right now. When you hit this, it's not going to project. So we have to. So what we have to do right before you hit it, I'll be right here, and I'm going to come up and make sure that the screen will display it. So we just have to do something a little bit different. But I have these are your two videos. So let's start. So yeah, when you're ready to do a video, just have me come do it. So you have to hit Windows, hold this, P, and then go to duplicate.
Oh.
I mean, so if you want to do that before you show, because once when we do duplicate, then it's going to show exactly what's on our screen. Yeah.
And then
To go back, you can just go straight to the PowerPoint. It's actually kind of easy.
Great.
Yeah.
Great. So and then I move here. Okay, so let's see. So if I go back to this. Let's show here. Window and P.
Yes, but
Yeah.
okay, yeah.
Window and P and duplicate. Okay.
Yeah?
Okay.
Welcome back to those watching on the live stream. We'll just get started in about 2 minutes.
Just to look for a video to let it.
Do you think that we will have Spanish speaker in the audience? Just Spanish?
I don't know. I mean, I know there are a few people who are local teachers, but
Okay.
it seems like they've been understanding.
Okay. No, I can. I will do like Miranda did like the summary, but I didn't know if you wanted me to do more.
That should be okay.
I just opened my then after my presentation.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, I don't need water. I have my water. Okay, just in case we are like so in the bathroom.
Muchas gracias por su puntualidad. Muy buenas tardes. Damos inicio entonces a nuestro cuarto panel de este simposio de UPR Michigan. Nuestro panel se titula Migración, Transnacionalismo y la producción de conocimiento. Para esta primera conferencia nos acompaña Marisol Fila, que es estudiante graduada del Center for Latin American and Caribbean Studies de University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. El título de su presentación de hoy es Transnational Partnership and Collaborative Production of Knowledge, Afrodescendants in Argentina.
Okay, so my presentation is in English, but I will be summarizing and translating some part of it into Spanish. So let's get started. So I am a PhD candidate in Spanish and Portuguese in the Department of Romance Languages and Literatures at the University of Michigan. I received my BA in History from the University of Buenos Aires in Argentina. I'm from Argentina. And my dissertation examines the mechanism by which 21st century Afro-descendant groups in South America, particularly in Argentina, contest and negotiate the dominant ideologies of national belonging through printed and digital press. So I say that by studying historical and contemporary self-representations of Afro-descendant groups in printed and digital culture, my research seeks to recognize the influence of the Afro community and culture to the formation of the Argentine national identity, and the necessity of locating Afro-descendants as social, political, and cultural active subjects, not only through the history, but also in the present time. In addition to my dissertation research, I have been developing projects in partnership with Afro-Argentine activist organizations that since the decade of the 1990s have been raising their voices against the discrimination suffered. So I will begin this presentation by discussing the projects that I have been generating with the Afro-Argentine group called Shango to explore the possibilities of a scholarly work conceived as a combination of theory and practice. I will then turn to provide a brief overview of the proposed lesson content to end with a discussion of the connections between my research work, the proposed lesson plan, and the theme of the symposium. As I will try to show, through my research and teaching, I seek to produce knowledge in collaboration and to promote participative and horizontal partnerships between the academia and community-based organizations. Entonces aquí hay como un breve resumen de lo que va a ser mi presentación. Voy a comenzar contextualizando un poco el contexto y la historia de Argentina y localizando a los grupos afrodescendientes dentro de Argentina. Luego voy a hablar sobre la propuesta de la actividad y de la lección y voy a finalizar haciendo una breve discusión sobre las relaciones entre mi investigación, la propuesta de las actividades y del lesson plan y el tema del simposio. So I will get started. So the discourse of national identity that emerged in Argentina during the formation of the nation state in the 19th and 20th century was constructed under a particular classist and racist vision that privileged white European migrants at the same time that turned invisible the presence of Afro-descendants and indigenous groups. The contribution of the Afro-descendants and indigenous populations to the formation of the Argentinian nation state was dismissed through diverse mechanisms of negation and invisibilization. The common explanation for the disappearance of the Afro population were the decline of the slave trade after the independence, the death of African and Afro-descendant soldiers in the independence wars, and the War of the Triple Alliance, fought between Paraguay and the Triple Alliance of Argentina, the Empire of Brazil, and Uruguay between 1864 and 1870. The death suffered during the yellow fever process of miscegenization, that is progressive whiteness, together with low birth rates and high mortality rates. These narratives became part of the popular thinking, and by the beginning of the 20th century, Argentina was imagined and projected to the world as a white European nation. This process can be understood as a process of invisibilization of the Afrodescendant populations. Entonces, durante todo el siglo XX principalmente, diferentes narrativas y diferentes historias sobre la desaparición de los grupos afroargentinos se fueron poniendo en marcha y reproduciendo. Principalmente las explicaciones eran que los grupos afrodescendientes habían desaparecido durante el siglo XIX por muertes durante las guerras de la independencia, muertes durante las epidemias de fiebre amarilla o diferentes guerras que fueron ocurriendo entre el territorio argentino y otros estados durante todo el siglo XIX y por procesos de mestizaje en la que grupos afrodescendientes o africanos iban mezclándose con otros grupos dentro de Argentina y progresivamente blanqueándose. Todas esas diferentes narrativas y esas diferentes historias dieron lugar a lo que se conoce como un proceso de invisibilización en la que las comunidades afro pierden su lugar dentro de la historia argentina y dentro dentro de la sociedad argentina. Entendiéndose actualmente en Argentina que la idea como más generalizada es que todos los argentinos somos provenientes de inmigrantes europeos que llegaron durante la última mitad del siglo XIX y eran principalmente españoles o italianos. Entonces, la idea de que los argentinos descendemos de los barcos viene de esa narrativa, de esa historia que localiza la identidad argentina a fines del siglo XIX y como descendiente de europea. However, since the 1990s, different Afro-descendant organizations have been raising their voices against the discrimination suffered and generating mechanisms of national and transnational articulation with other social and cultural movements. One major achievement in this direction was the participation of different Afro-Argentine organizations in the 2001 World Conference Against Racism in Durban, South Africa. Desde los años 90, diferentes grupos afrodescendientes en Argentina comenzaron a mostrarse más activos y un punto muy importante dentro de esa nueva visibilidad es la participación de grupos afroargentinos y también otros grupos afrodescendientes latinoamericanos de la Conferencia de Durban en Sudáfrica en el año 2001 contra el racismo que da paso a una serie de medidas que luego las Naciones Unidas van a dictaminar y como de alguna manera proponer para los diferentes estados reconocer los grupos afrodescendientes dentro de cada uno de los países. The Afro-Argentina Association, Shango, is a particularly active member of this network of organizations in Argentina that is currently standing for the construction of a more equitable society in terms of social, economic, cultural, and political access, and inclusion of minority groups, understanding that the transnational articulation is key to fight against the invisibilization of Afro-Argentines and racism and discrimination against them. Shango is committed to strengthen bonds with international groups that are in the same path and to spread awareness of their activities. La agrupación Afro-Argentina Shango es una agrupación con la que actualmente estoy trabajando. Se formó también durante los años 90 con grupos afroargentinos y migrantes afro-uruguayos y tienen una propuesta muy activa en realizar alianzas con otras organizaciones latinoamericanas y también en promover la educación de los jóvenes afroargentinos. Voy a mostrar aquí, I'm going to show here one video of, okay, here, I get it, window and P and duplicate, and so here,
Mi nombre es Luján Álvarez.
Mi nombre es Dila.
Mi nombre es Alejandra Ejido. Soy Lisa María.
Soy Conferencia.
Mi nombre es Daniela.
Mi nombre es Carlos Álvarez Nazareno.
Mi nombre es Marcela Lorenzo.
Soy Felipe, soy afroargentino.
Soy afroargentina.
Soy Jacqueline Serrano, afroargentina.
Soy afroargentina.
Soy afroargentina. Soy afrodescendiente argentina, misionera.
Soy Liliana Coronel, soy afrodescendiente.
Soy Victoria, afrodescendiente.
Soy afrodescendiente.
Soy afroargentina.
Te invito a festejar
el 8 de noviembre, Día de los Afroargentinos.
Una reivindicación histórica por nuestros ancestros, por los que estamos y también por los que están por venir.
El Día de los Afroargentinos.
Comunidad afroargentina.
No faltes.
Porque Argentina también es afro.
8 de noviembre, Día Nacional de los Afroargentinos, las afroargentinas y la cultura afro. Del 8 al 12 de noviembre, sumate, visibilizate, participá. Ley 26.852, en conmemoración de María Remedios del Valle, Madre de la Patria.
So November the 8th is the National Day of the Afro-Argentines. It was established in 2013, and every year different...
Yo soy una mujer de...
No! Every year, different activities are organized around that day. So, since 2017, I've been developing different projects in partnership with Shango. These are some of the activities that we actually organized in the winter of 2018. And one of the videos that you saw, what we did was translating it from Spanish to English in collaboration with students. So we did some translations of videos that Shango recorded, and then what we also did was a translation of a teaching guide that Shango created in collaboration with Argentinian teachers that is about the history and the culture of Afro-Argentines. So, entonces, estas son algunas de las actividades que estuvimos desarrollando en colaboración con el grupo afroargentino Shango desde el 2017. En el invierno del 2018 realizamos la traducción y el subtitulado de algunos de los videos de Shango que están disponibles en YouTube para que pudieran estar en español y en inglés, y también la traducción de una guía pedagógica que el grupo Shango desarrolló con maestros de la Argentina para la enseñanza de la historia y la cultura de los afroargentinos en escuelas primarias y secundarias en Argentina. Hay una ley que también establece que es obligatoria la enseñanza de la cultura afro, pero no se cumple. There's a law that says that the history of the Afrodescendants in Argentina needs to be part of the curriculum in the schools, but it's currently not there. So Shango proposed a series of activities to include the history and the culture of these groups. And then in the fall of 2018, last October, we were able to brought the group to the University of Michigan campus, and they did some public talks about education in Argentina, about migration of African and the current situations of young Afro-descendants in Argentina, and they also offered some cultural workshops about music and candombe. Ofrecieron en el otoño del 2018, en octubre, el grupo pudo venir al campus, a la Universidad de Michigan, y se ofrecieron diferentes charlas y diferentes actividades para toda la comunidad que incluyeron algunos talleres culturales sobre candombe y tambores, y fue algo muy bueno. So, and also, okay, great. So, and also in addition to these projects, I'm also working on developing partnerships with Shango and my teaching practice. As a graduate student instructor in the program of Romance Languages and Literatures, I have designed a course in Afro-Argentina that I taught during last fall. The multidisciplinary and temporal methodology proposed for that course aimed to contest the invisibility that Afro-descendant groups have been experiencing in Argentina since the end of the 19th century. En adición de estos diferentes proyectos desarrollados en conjunto con Shango, en el otoño pasado también tuve la oportunidad de enseñar un curso sobre Afro-Argentina y también fue en colaboración con el grupo donde se hicieron diferentes entrevistas a los miembros del grupo y el proyecto final del curso también incluía la creación de un proyecto cultural que era disponible también públicamente y compartido con las agrupaciones afroargentinas. Bien, so I'm now turning to the overview of the lesson plan so as not to be talking forever. So in the lesson, okay, the Afro-Argentines are presented as a case study to get to larger questions of social constructions of race and national and local identity. Some of the goals that I envision for this proposed lesson plan are reflecting on the relationship between race and national history, challenging dominant regimes of representations in national history, and reflecting on the ways in which stories are told and the possibilities of telling our own stories, who are our heroes and what values do they represent. The primary question driving the lesson is how do marginalized communities use history and storytelling to claim their space in a national identity, both in history and in the present. En la lección que estoy proponiendo, los grupos afroargentinos son presentados como un estudio de caso para poder reflexionar sobre preguntas mayores y más abarcativas de construcciones de la raza y de identidades en contextos nacionales y locales. Y también propongo una serie como de objetivos para reflexionar en la relación entre raza e historia nacional y también discutir los regímenes dominantes de representación en las historias nacionales y qué grupos son capaces de contar las historias y desde dónde y a través de qué figuras. Entonces, la lección que yo propongo está dividida en tres días e incluye una presentación que ahora voy a hablar y una contextualización de la historia de los afroargentinos y de Argentina también, para luego ver experiencias actuales y finalmente terminar con un proyecto creativo por parte de los estudiantes. So the lesson that I'm proposing, it's divided in 3 different days and includes an introduction of who are the Afro-Argentines and thinking a little bit about the figures that they currently have as the symbols of their struggles and their participation and their place in the Argentinian history. Then a second day about the current experiences of Afro-Argentines, and a third day that will be a creative project by the students reflecting on what they have learned during these first 2 days. So in day 1, I suggest here a series of materials that could be used for this lesson. There is a newspaper article that says, in Argentina there are no blacks, and then 2 videos that are also from Shango, Soy Afroargentino y Día de los Afroargentinos. Entonces, en esta lección, en el primer día, es una introducción y una localización de qué es Argentina, quiénes son los afroargentinos, y propongo un artículo periodístico que discute la existencia o no de negros en Argentina y 2 videos que también contextualizan la historia de los afroargentinos. Una segunda parte del día 1 que es sobre María Remedios del Valle, la afroargentina capitana y madre de la patria. Todos estos son enlaces que van a textos y a diferentes videos y recursos. The second part of day 1 is about María Remedios del Valle, the Afro-Argentine captain and mother of the fatherland. María Remedios del Valle is currently the symbol of the Afro-Argentinian groups, and the 8th of November, the day of the Afro-Argentines, it's in honor to María Remedios del Valle death. She was one Afro-Argentinian soldier who fought during the independence wars in the 19th century. So here, this is a link to an article about the history of María Remedios del Valle and her importance for the Afro-Argentinian groups. And here I propose a series of questions, reflection questions for the end of day 1. Who was María Remedios del Valle? What values does she represent? Why did she become the symbol of the Afro-Argentine movement? Etc. Entonces, para el final del día 1, incluyo algunas preguntas de reflexión. ¿Quién era María Remedios del Valle? ¿Cómo se convirtió en el símbolo de los afroargentinos y del movimiento afroargentino? ¿Cómo los afroargentinos se representan en la nación? Y reflexionar también para que los estudiantes puedan pensar qué ocurre aquí en Puerto Rico y si hay algunos héroes afrodescendientes que los estudiantes mismos conozcan. Then the day 2 is about contemporary experiences of young Afro-Argentines. And this is a video that I also want to show. Let me see. Okay. Ahí. Is it here? Este es un video que los jóvenes de Yangó grabaron en octubre del 2017.
Hola, mi nombre es Xiomara Lorenzo, soy afroargentina. En el colegio sufrí varios tipos de discriminación y uno de los casos fue cuando entré a sexto año, que me discriminaban por mi color de piel, por mi pelo, y llegó un tiempo que me sentía tan excluida de todo por ser como soy, por tener pelo mota, que no quería ya ir al colegio, que llegaba de querer ser como ellos, tratar de integrarme para no sentirme rara, de planchar mi pelo y que no te acepten, de decir por qué soy así y tratar de cambiar, pero después llegó un tiempo que ya me di cuenta que soy así y te cuesta a la vez porque no ser como todos, no tener el mismo color, sufro una discriminación muy fuerte. Sí.
So this video is also other of the videos that we translated and subtitled in collaboration with students. And here. It's a 30-minute video in which young Afro-Argentines talk about their experiences and the different activities that they do in order to contest the current invisibility and discrimination that they suffer. So, and I also included as another resource this teaching guide that is Guía para los docentes sobre afrodescendientes y la cultura afroargentinos. It's available online both in Spanish and in English. In English, it was the translation that we also did at the university last year. And I think that it's very interesting because it includes different proposals and activities, but cultural and the history and resources for articles and for some music that can be used in the classroom. So I'm also including here some reflection questions for the end of day 2. ¿Quiénes son los afroargentinos? ¿Qué significa ser negro en Argentina? ¿Qué significa ser joven y negro en Argentina? Para que los estudiantes también puedan reflexionar desde lo que han visto y leído cómo es la relación entre raza y clase en Argentina y de qué manera estos jóvenes y estos diferentes grupos están tratando de buscar y de reclamar su espacio en la nación argentina. And finally, in day 3, it's the creative project, How Do We Tell Our Own Stories? So I propose like a work in different groups, in small groups. Propongo una actividad para el día 3 que es un proyecto creativo para que los estudiantes puedan trabajar en pequeños grupos de 3 a 4 estudiantes y que puedan escoger una figura histórica o contemporánea que represente los valores de su comunidad, como de la misma manera que los afroargentinos están haciendo con María Remedios del Valle, y que puedan grabar un video corto de 3 a 4 minutos en el cual cuenten la historia de esa figura, de ese personaje, y por qué la eligieron y qué valores representa para la comunidad. También incluye como propuesta algunas reflexiones y preguntas hacia el fin de la lección. Reflect on what you have learned about the Afro-Argentines, their history and their present, and what you did in the creative project. Now think about the following questions. How do we tell our own stories? Why it is important? Mi intención es, con esta propuesta es que también pueda establecerse el puente y la conexión entre historias de grupos marginalizados en otros territorios, en otros países latinoamericanos, y las propias historias que los diferentes estudiantes pueden pensar sobre sus comunidades en términos locales y sobre la nación en términos más amplios. Y cómo es posible cambiar las ideas y las narraciones actuales sobre la historia y la identidad nacional. Bien. And now, just to finish very quickly, because I've been talking for a while, so I would like to briefly talk about some emerging questions that I had after thinking about this proposal, this lesson plan, and the research that I'm now doing. So some emerging questions and the relation between the pedagogy and the symposium and my research are the intersection between race, class, and nation, how we represent national and local identities, and what stories are left out of national history and why. So I want to keep strengthening partnership with Shango and to keep developing projects that look to establish connections between experiences of oppression and marginalization of minority groups in different countries, while also proposing an articulation of these experiences under a global standing against racism and exclusion. And I believe that the articulation between my research and my work with Shango is key in not only bringing visibility to these groups, but in moving towards a more participatory, collaborative, and horizontal production of knowledge, under the same spirit of building transnational relations and generating collaborative partnerships between the academia and community-based organizations, and coordinating partnerships between coordinating a collaborative project for translating existing publications in Portuguese by GLEDES. GLEDES is the Institute of the Black Woman in Sao Paulo. So I'm also trying to connect these different groups and to do some translations from GLEDES, from Portuguese to English. And the goal is to have materials produced by the organization available in multiple languages so they can be accessed by a broader audience. This translated text will be published in GLEDES website as well as in online portals of Afro-Argentine groups. La idea también es contribuir a la relación también entre diferentes grupos de afrodescendientes latinoamericanos, por eso también estoy trabajando con otro grupo que es GLEDES, que es el Instituto de la Mujer Negra, también en la traducción de algunos de sus materiales para que puedan estar disponibles en portugués, español, e inglés. And I'm including here, because you will have access to this presentation, some links to different resources of Agrupación Shango, and in case you are interested. Bien, muchas gracias. Thank you.
Agradecemos a Marisol por esta interesante ponencia y continuamos con Cheryl Jean. Ella es estudiante graduada del Center for Southwest Asian Studies de University of Michigan Ann Arbor. El título de su trabajo de hoy es Where is Home for Cambodian Americans Deportees, Home, Identity and Residency Status.
Okay, buenas tardes. Good afternoon. Reconozco que estamos en la tierra tradicional de la gente taíno. Vamos a considerar los muchos legados de colonialismo, migración, desplazamiento y asentamiento que nos unen hoy. I want to acknowledge that we are on the traditional land of the Taino people. Let us consider the many legacies of colonialism, migration, displacement, and settlement that brings us together today. So my presentation is called Where is Home? A Case Study of Cambodian American Immigration and Deportation. Before I begin, I want to talk about my terminology. I use Cambodian to refer to the people of Cambodia, but I use the word Khmer to refer to the language. Some people may use these two terms interchangeably, but this is the choice I have made with my own research and writing. The case study that I'm looking at is about the criminal deportation of Cambodian Americans. Since 2002, over 600 Cambodian Americans were deported to Cambodia. Most were men, most came to the US as refugee children, and they lived here legally as lawful permanent residents. They were deported for committing criminal offenses, not because they were illegal or undocumented immigrants. Most have never set foot in Cambodia. Most were actually born in Thailand, in Thai refugee camps, before their families resettled in the US. And some cannot speak, read, or write in Khmer. Today, there are over 16,000 Southeast Asian American refugees, and some of these include Cambodian Americans. The others are Vietnamese, Hmong, and Laotian, with deportation orders due to their criminal record. While some refugees have already been deported, thousands more living in the United States live with uncertainty, not knowing when they will be deported and taken away from their family. I'll give a really quick overview of why and how Cambodians came to the US as refugees. Here's just a quick map of Southeast Asia on the left. Cambodia is kind of the orange country next to Thailand, Laos, and Vietnam. And on the right is just the country of Cambodia by itself. Very briefly, due to communism in the late 1970s, Cambodians were forced into hard labor, living and working communally with little food or sleep. As a result, estimates of the death toll range from 1 to 2 million Cambodians, or 21 to 25% of the population died. So like Cambodia, Vietnam and Laos also underwent very similar communist regimes. So Cambodians, Vietnamese, Laotian, and Hmong, and so Hmong are stateless people who kind of live in between the border of Thailand and Laos. So Cambodians, Vietnamese, Laotian, and Hmong fled their homeland to escape war. Many of them went to countries such as Thailand to seek refuge. So these were refugee camps where Southeast Asian Americans lived before being resettled to what is called the third country. So country number 1 is their country of origin. Country number 2 is the refugee camp. Country number 3 is the country that they resettled in. And that's usually the US, Australia, Canada, France, New Zealand. So my talk will be about refugees who resettled in the United States. However, before resettling in the US, life in these refugee camps continued. People got married, people had children, and so many of the Cambodian American deportees I'll be talking about were actually born here in Thailand. So when I say that many of them have never been to Cambodia, it's because they were born here. So really quickly, the United States passed what's called the United States Refugee Act of 1980. And so after the passage of that act, over 1 million Southeast Asian refugees came to the United States. So here's just some data. I'm going to zoom in for Cambodians, Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam. So there's no Hmong. The Hmong people are probably subsumed under the country of Laos. And so one question I would ask my students if we were to interpret a chart like this is to kind of look at, when were kind of the largest, which year had the largest wave of, ethnic Cambodians, Laos, or Vietnamese who came to the United States, and what was the impact of the United States Refugee Act? Now I'm going to transition to what life was like for Cambodian refugees when they came to the US. And this is also a large topic as well, but I'm just going to say the United States failed refugees, Southeast Asian refugees, when they came to the US. A lot of them came with lack of English proficiency, and they lacked employment. There wasn't enough resources for health and mental health problems. A lot of the adults saw death and genocide, and so they have a lot of trauma, PTSD, and there just wasn't enough mental health resources for them. No medical professionals who can speak their language or understand their culture. And due to poverty, many of them lived in low-income neighborhoods. And so I also want to differentiate between the experience of an adult resettling in the US versus a child resettling in the US. And I'm going to focus on refugee youths because a lot of the Cambodian Americans who are being deported came here as very young children. And refugee youths, Southeast Asian refugee youths, reported being bullying. They reported being beat up and assaulted on their way to schools. So a lot of them joined gangs to protect themselves. They reported racial profiling and discrimination by police officers and teachers in schools. And there was a lot of intergenerational trauma, a lot of conflict between their parents' culture and American culture. And so to talk about what life was like in the US, I have a lot of kind of statistical data that looks at, poverty, education, healthcare, and this is just one example of a statistical chart that students might look at and interpret. And so I would, if I were teaching a lesson, I would ask, what percentage of Cambodians in the US have a bachelor's degree or higher, and Cambodia's down there. And then how do they compare with other Asian ethnic groups? And how do they compare with other Southeast Asian kind of ethnic groups? So as you can see, Vietnamese, Hmong, Cambodian, and Laotian are down at the bottom. Taiwanese and Asian Indian are the highest. And so another kind of angle that we can get at is this idea of the model minority myth, or what is hidden when all Asian nationalities are subsumed under the term Asian or Asian American. So if you look at the chart on the left, you'll see that it looks like Asian Americans are doing pretty well. 29% have bachelor's degrees, and 20% have postgraduate degree. So Asian Americans look really great, but if you disaggregate the data, if you differentiate the data by ethnic groups, you'll get what is on the right. And very briefly, another angle that I think this case study can help in the classroom is to talk about residency or legal status. What does it mean to be a citizen, and what does it mean to be a non-citizen? And so a lot of the Cambodian refugees who are being deported today were non-citizens, but they were not in the US illegally, or they were not undocumented. They were green card holders or lawful permanent residents. And they came here as refugees. And so kind of thinking about what does that mean? What are the different rights citizens have over non-citizens? And how do you become a citizen? So many people become citizen by birth, but there's also naturalization. And so I don't really have time to get into it, but there was just a lot of lack of resources and knowledge given to refugees when they came to the United States that prevented them from naturalizing as US citizens. And as I'll get into the next slide, due to that issue, a lot of them are being deported today because as a non-citizen, if you commit certain crimes, you can be deported. So the 1996 Act, which I'm just gonna call the 1996 Act, but it's called the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act of 1996. And the passage of this act impacted Southeast Asian American communities for three main reasons. One is that anyone who commits an aggravated felony can be deported. So aggravated felony is a really ambiguous term. It sounds really bad, but it includes public urination. It includes possession of marijuana, Someone was about to be deported because he broke a window when he was drunk. So there are very minor non-violent crimes that can cause people to be deported. Number two, it was retroactive. So even though it was passed in 1996, people who have criminal records before 1996 can still be deported, even if they've already served their sentence. And then finally, the 1996 Act took away due process or judicial discretion. In the past, an immigration judge can look at each person case by case. They can say, oh, you know, this person committed a crime in the 1980s. They've changed. They've become a better person. We don't need to deport them. Or this person has children in the US. If we deport them, this can affect their families. But after the 1996 Act, there is no longer due process, and it's almost an automatic deportation. But up until 2002, the US was unable to deport non-citizen Cambodian Americans because Cambodia was unwilling to accept them. But in 2002, the US and Cambodian government signed a memorandum of understanding, which was basically an agreement that Cambodia will accept deportees. So as I mentioned in the beginning, the 1996 Act and the 2002 Memorandum of Understanding had a huge impact on Southeast Asian Americans, and over 16,000 Southeast Asian Americans currently have deportation orders in the United States, and 78% of those were based on old criminal records, compared to only 26% of other immigrant groups, who have old criminal convictions. And there really is no order or rhyme or reason in who gets deported first. So those 16,000 Southeast Asian American refugees are in limbo. They don't know when it's going to be their last day in the United States before they're separated from their family. So one angle that I look at with this case study is, where is home? According to the US government, non-citizens who commit certain crimes can be deported to their, quote, country of origin, but where is the country of origin for Cambodian Americans who have never been to Cambodia, but were born in Thailand, but grew up most of their lives in the US? Even though, you know, that's the reality, the US government thinks country of origin means where your parents came from. But for Cambodian American refugees, I have a couple quotes here. For them, it's the US. They say, this Cambodia ain't home. America's my home. And this is Con Hin. He was deported to Cambodia in 2015. Toi Chak is, he has a deportation order, and he said, how will I survive there? I'm not a farmer kind of guy. I'm a city boy. America is my home. I've lived here for 30 years. And so one kind of lesson or activity that I envision with students is to have them read personal stories or narratives about deportees or Southeast Asian refugees with deportation orders, to kind of look at their life experiences growing up, look at their relationship with parents and family, what issues they had in school and maybe in their community, and what laws and policies impacted them and their community. So just really quickly, here's one example of two brothers. One brother became a naturalized US citizen, the other did not. So Puti Hak has kidney disease, and he became a US citizen, and he gets dialysis every couple of days, and he needs a new kidney. His brother, Tuch Hak, is willing to donate his kidney to his brother, but because he never became a US citizen and because he was charged with a drug crime, he could be deported before he can donate his kidney to his brother. And so here's just kind of like a section of a newspaper article where I envision students kind of going through it and kind of highlighting, you know, aspects of refugees' lives as children. And in this newspaper article, you find out that Tuch witnessed a school shooting when he was 11, and his father said that he was traumatized, and since then his son has never been the same. And you also find out the drug crime. That happened, and it says in November 2005, the Drug Enforcement Administration conducted Operation Sweet Tooth, and it was the culmination of an international investigation in the US and Canada that netted 291 arrests and the seizure of 1 million ecstasy pills and 1,800 pounds of marijuana. And so Twitch was one of the 291 people arrested in 2005. And so here's kind of the graphic organizer that I envision students filling out when they're reading these personal stories. Kind of what are the contributing factors of deportation at the individual level, at the home and family level, at the community level, and at the governmental level. But also, what are the effects of deportation on the individual level, at the home level, at the community level, and at the government level. And not all the personal stories or newspaper articles will touch upon each level, but I would envision students being able to fill out most of it. And so finally, are Vietnamese American refugees next? In 2008, the US government and the Vietnamese government signed a similar memorandum of understanding. The Vietnamese American community, witnessing what happened to Cambodian Americans, made sure that that agreement stipulated that no Vietnamese American refugee who arrives prior to 1995 would be deported. And July 12, 1995 is when the US and Vietnam reestablished relations with each other. But the Trump administration is interested in renegotiating with Vietnam to deport non-citizen Vietnamese refugees who arrived prior to 1995. And so one possible lesson activity is to have students read newspaper articles highlighting important facts and individual narratives similar to the Cambodian American refugees. And my hope is that this would sound very similar to what happened to Cambodian Americans. And as a final kind of activity, I asked students to fill out the same graphic organizer of kind of the effects and causes of deportation at the different levels, individual, family, community, and government, and have them turn that into a letter. They can write a letter to a politician or a newspaper op-ed to highlight the ways in which modifying the Memorandum of Understanding with Vietnam to take away that pre-1995 agreement would impact the Vietnamese American community. I hope that they would talk about, what caused Vietnamese Americans to have criminal records from an individual, family, societal, and governmental level, and how might deportation affect them on those various levels as well. And so you'll all have copies of my PowerPoint. These are the different resources that I found helpful, and I will end it there. Thank you very much.
Continuamos ahora con la presentación de Glorimari Peña Alicea, que es estudiante del programa graduado de Historia de la Universidad de Puerto Rico, recinto de Río Piedras. Su trabajo de investigación es sobre la migración dominicana en Yola a Puerto Rico. El título de su presentación de hoy es Migración de retorno y nociones de hogar en las memorias de los migrantes dominicanos y el merengue.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Gracias. Bueno, disculpen. A mí no me gusta hacer mucho PowerPoint, pero
Buenas tardes. Esto es parte de mi proyecto de tesis de maestría en el Departamento de Historia acá en la Universidad de Puerto Rico. Trabajo específicamente con la migración indocumentada dominicana a Puerto Rico en Yola. Me concentro en el periodo del 1985 al 2000 y acá les voy a traer entonces pues parte, ¿verdad? Un ángulo de mi tesis en donde trabajo pues las prácticas transnacionales de nociones de hogar y la migración de retorno en, ¿verdad?, la memoria de una dominicana que vino a Puerto Rico y articulada con la música, para posteriormente entonces ver cómo este trabajo o un trabajo así se puede articular, ¿verdad?, ya sea a varias lecciones o a un currículo de una clase. Uno de los aspectos que encierra la migración y las prácticas transnacionales lo son el retorno y las nociones de hogar. En esta ocasión deseo prestar atención a la memoria de un viaje en Yola y cómo los viajes en Yola y estas prácticas transnacionales son abordadas en 5 canciones de merengue, las cuales son La Yola de Wilfrido Vargas, 1983, Visa para un sueño de Juan Luis Guerra, La Yola se va de Luis el Terror Díaz, Aquí pero allá de la Banda Gorda de Peña Suazo, La hora de volver de Rita Indiana y los Misterios y Volvió Juanita de Mili Quesada y los Vecinos. Además de resaltar cómo se puede incluir las fuentes orales y la música en el proceso de educación, pues aquí en Puerto Rico la realidad es que no hay ninguna sección ni ningún currículo que yo tenga, que tenga conocimiento en donde se aborde la historia de los grupos migratorios que han hecho de esta isla su hogar. A través de recursos como la música, el cine, la literatura y la historia oral, podemos de una manera dinámica incluir este tema tan importante en este momento histórico en Puerto Rico y los Estados Unidos. Para efecto de esta presentación, las canciones que son seleccionadas de forma aleatoria serán tratadas como fuentes orales y se identificarán las prácticas transnacionales presentadas en las canciones, como los envíos de bienes, las identidades y las nociones de retorno. El merengue es un elemento significativo en la cultura dominicana. Su origen se remonta a la segunda mitad del siglo XIX, ganando popularidad en el país. A pesar de la gran difusión que ha tenido este estilo musical y de que otras naciones lo hayan adoptado, como por ejemplo aquí en Puerto Rico en las décadas de los 80 y los 90, el merengue es indiscutiblemente dominicano. Por consiguiente, si el merengue es parte de la cultura dominicana y reflejo de su sociedad, se puede analizar e interpretar las representaciones que hacen las letras del merengue de retorno, como una visión de la sociedad dominicana. En este caso estudiaremos los aspectos de la migración en Yola en conjunto con un testimonio oral. Altagracia hizo entrada a Puerto Rico el 5 de noviembre de 1990. La precariedad que enfrentaba en la República Dominicana, el desempleo, ser madre soltera y no tener que darle de comer a sus 3 hijos fueron las razones principales por las que Altagracia decidió venir en Yola a la isla. Su hermano también deseaba cumplir el sueño americano, así que se convirtió en reclutador de pasajeros para poder llegar a Puerto Rico en estas embarcaciones frágiles. La empleadora de Altagracia, al ver su situación económica, fue la que le sugirió que hablara con su hermano, ya que él tenía los contactos para poder irse en Yola. Su hermano, sin ninguna inconveniencia, decidió ayudarla y para esto pues tuvo que reclutar a otros, ¿verdad?, otros dominicanos que también tuvieran, ¿verdad?, la intención de viajar a Puerto Rico para llenar estas pequeñas embarcaciones y moverse a la isla. Pero antes, pues ella tuvo que estar alrededor de 1 mes en el monte, que es, ¿verdad?, los matorrales o la zona boscosa que está cerca de las playas, ahí escondidos hasta que pues puedan salir estas embarcaciones. Ella le dijo a su madre que se iba y le encargó a sus hijos. Y ahí empieza la primera canción. En el 1983, Wilfrido Vargas, en su disco El Funcionario, incluye el tema No te montes en esa yola. Aquí expone varios puntos importantes, que el negocio de las yolas te pueden engañar, te pueden matar o puedes morir en el Canal de la Mona. El Canal de la Mona es este estrecho de mar que separan a República Dominicana y Haití de Puerto Rico y se caracteriza por tener fuertes corrientes y tiburones y pues porque muchos migrantes han perdido su vida en ese pedazo de mar. Es interesante cómo el discurso de la vagancia está vinculado con el de emigrar. El que quiere emigrar es porque no quiere trabajar. Cuando menciona Puerto Rico queda cerca pero montado en avión, y si consiguen la visa no hay problema en migración. Esto me hace pensar en la dificultad que aún el día de hoy enfrentan los dominicanos para hacer estos trámites. Un ejemplo de cuán difícil era hacer estos trámites en las décadas de los 70, los 80 y los 90, lo aborda Juan Luis Guerra en la famosa canción, ¿verdad?, Visa para un sueño. Los dominicanos que querían entrar a territorio estadounidense tenían que hacer largas filas, llenar muchos papeles y costear todo este proceso. Era un poco más sencillo para las personas que vivían en la capital, pero otras personas tenían que venir desde las afueras de la ciudad, lo que muchas veces resultaba en una pérdida de tiempo. Y el consulado dominicano, ¿verdad? El consulado estadounidense, pues no daba abasto con las solicitudes de las visas. Altagracia es una de esas personas que no podía pagar, así que ella se saltó el proceso y ella ignoró este reclamo que hace Wilfrido en No te montes en esa yola y se montó en el 90. La yola se va, la yola se va y te deja la yola, rodando por el suelo y se va y se va y se va la yola y se va. A un mes de dejar a sus hijos con su madre, estar en el monte y estar a punto de perder la vida, Altagracia llega a Puerto Rico con un objetivo: conseguir empleo y poder traer a sus hijos. Muchos dominicanos, al igual que Altagracia, no pueden desvincularse de su país de origen. Al contrario, efectúan prácticas transnacionales que hacen que este vínculo sea más grande. La canción Aquí pero allá de la banda Gorda expone esta nostalgia que sienten muchos dominicanos cuando recuerdan a su patria, a pesar de estar tan cerca y en un país que es bastante similar al suyo. Nadie se imagina cuánto me dolió tener que dejar mi tierra, pero tenía que hacerlo. Buscaba el futuro de los míos y hoy que estoy tan lejos de ello, quisiera dejarlo todo y volver, porque estoy aquí, pero mi corazón está allá. A su vez, la escritora dominicana Rita Indiana, establecida hace algunos años en Puerto Rico, tiene un proyecto musical llamado Rita Indiana y los Misterios. A pesar de que ella misma se identificaba, ¿verdad?, más con la literatura, a lo que se ha dedicado principalmente en los últimos años, cuenta con su única producción musical que ha tenido una buena acogida en la isla. Su primer disco, titulado El Juidero, retrata varias estampas del dominicano transnacional y las dinámicas que se dan dentro de la experiencia migratoria. En su canción La Hora de Volver ofrece una alternativa de regreso o un llamado a la conciencia de regresar. La canción muestra el trabajo que pasa el migrante en la diáspora y todos los malabares que tienen que hacer. Este es un pedazo, le voy a poner un pedazo de la canción.
A la bruja a comprar cachucha, en otros países a comer basura rusa. Te la buscaste como todo un león, hiciste tanta fuerza que hoy te queda un cuarto de cojón. Pégate botones y perata con la boca y le aguantaste vainas a todita la querosa. Subiste nevera con 5 vacas dentro y en un invierno en Nueva York te viste muerto. Caía la nieve sobre el cuerpo adormecido, tenías hasta los intestinos entumecidos. Viste una visión, una discoteca, bajo una enramada, dos morenas bajando cerveza. Te llegó la hora, papi, como a Monkey Magic. Súbete a esta nube y deposítate en tu calle. Coge un avión, coño, una yola al revés. Tú no lo ves, llegó la hora de volver.
Vamos a ver si puedo volver otra vez a la presentación, creo que sí. El regreso enmarcado por Rita Indiana es un ejemplo de una persona que no se ha adaptado al país receptor. En este caso, ejemplo de las diferencias en el clima y cómo esta persona, mientras pasa frío, se acuerda de su país y se imagina pasándola bien. Luego de crearle la escena de estar en su país, le dice que coja una yola al revés y que regrese. Y uno de los estribillos dice: todos vuelven a la tierra en que nacieron, al embrujo confundible de su sol, y quien quiere estar comiendo miel de hielo cuando puede estar bailando algo mejor. La alusión a la yola muestra que este individuo que emigró llegó en yola o en avión, lo que muestra pues las distintas formas en que los inmigrantes dominicanos, los medios de transportación que utilizan para migrar. Incluso podemos mostrar una tendencia en la migración dominicana, en la cual primero llegan en yola acá en Puerto Rico y cuando pues usan muchas veces la isla de trampolín para llegar hacia los Estados Unidos. Como fue el caso de uno de los que acompañó a Altagracia en la yola, que él le dijo a ella que si se iban entonces en avión hasta Estados Unidos, y ella optó por quedarse en Puerto Rico porque ella era más negra que él, y cuando fueran con un pasaporte falso, pues a ella la iban a deportar, ¿no? Y por eso decidió quedarse en Puerto Rico. En la segunda estrofa se menciona como que el regreso siempre está intrínseco en el migrante, cuando menciona todos vuelven a la tierra en que nacieron, aunque no necesariamente esto sea válido para todos los migrantes o la percepción del regreso. Además del retorno, en la canción se hace alusión a prácticas muy comunes en los migrantes dominicanos. Aparte del envío de remesas, los dominicanos también envían artículos de primera necesidad, ropa y alimentos, una práctica que muchas veces no queda documentada, sino es, ¿verdad?, en canciones o en memorias de estas experiencias migratorias. El regreso de Altagracia ofrece una alternativa diferente al retorno. Aunque ha visitado la República Dominicana varias veces, la pregunta es ¿cómo sería ese regreso? Si ella lo desea definitivo o no. Dentro de tener la idea de regresar presentada por Rita Indiana, o ese feliz regreso concretado por Mili Quesada en Volvió Juanita, la añoranza de regreso de Altagracia se ve como un vaivén entre las dos islas. Fíjate, sí. Pienso que algún día. ¿Tengo una casa allá y yo? Yo pienso que sí, porque tengo la mayoría de mi familia allá. Me gusta mi país, me gusta mucho aquí, pero cuando ya yo esté viejita, ¿qué yo voy a hacer? Sí, pienso que sí, tú sabes, que quizás algún día. ¿Cómo te digo? Como ir y venir así, durar un tiempo allá y volver. Eso sí me gustaría. Por eso tengo la casa. Dura un ejemplo 6 meses, vengo y vuelvo y me voy. Tú sabes, esto es lo que yo quiero. Mili Quesada nace en la República Dominicana, pero su carrera inicia en Nueva York junto a sus hermanos Mili y Jocelyn y los vecinos. Ellos interpretan el tema Volvió Juanita, que forma parte del disco Esta Noche. Estos hermanos, que forman parte de la diáspora dominicana en Nueva York, musicalizan la historia de Juanita, que regresa a su país de origen. Volvió Juanita y dijo que no volvía, volvió con una maleta cargada de lejanías. Volvió Juanita con su pollera pintada de pájaros y colores, de amores y de canciones. Aunque Olson y King mencionan que el regreso es parte de toda diáspora, en este caso Juanita dijo que no volvía. Esto da pie a cuestionar las razones por las que emigró. Quizás estas razones fueron traumáticas, las cuales llevaron a migrar sin considerar volver. A pesar de esto, decidió regresar a su tierra. No obstante, aunque en la letra de la canción no se menciona el país que llegó Juanita, se entiende que podría ser cualquier país caribeño. Qué bonita se ve llegando al aeropuerto, regresando otra vez a su gente y a su pueblo. Ay, Juan y Manuela, tu linda piel de canela, cuando bailaba la rumba en noches de luna llena, y su cuerpo de palmeras, sabor de coco y canela, alegría y aguardiente resbalaban por las caderas. El regreso de Juanita no es narrado por ella, sino por las personas que estaban esperándola. Yolanda Martínez San Miguel, en su libro Caribe Two Ways, Cultura de la Migración en el Caribe Insular Hispánico, trabaja también con Volvió Juanita, en donde argumenta que esta experiencia del retorno es una construcción de la identidad del dominicano que ha experimentado el migrar. A la vez que el narrador resalta cuán feliz está por la llegada y la fiesta que le están montando, no está en el texto si este regreso es temporal o es permanente, ya que está construido desde la voz de quienes la reciben. Volvió Juanita, vamos a celebrar con una fiestecita. ¿Qué falta tú hacías, Juanita del alma? Bienvenida seas, llegaste a tu patria. Volvió Juanita, vamos a celebrar con una fiestecita. Alegre está el barrio, todo es alegría, porque llega Juana de la lejanía. Como parte de la diáspora, el retorno es parte del proceso de emigrar, mientras que las canciones La Hora de Volver y Volvió Juanita exhortan a regresar al país de origen, en donde le espera la felicidad y los amigos y familiares con fiesta y alegría. Para Altagracia, retornar no es regresar y vivir para siempre en su país, sino estar una temporada en República Dominicana y otra en Puerto Rico. Esto varía de migrante en migrante. De las más de 15 entrevistas que he hecho a los dominicanos, hay algunos que dicen que en 20 años, cuando terminen de construir su casa, regresa. Hay otros que dicen que no, que ya Puerto Rico es su casa. Y otros como Altagracia, que pues se pasan una temporada en República Dominicana y otra aquí en Puerto Rico. Claro está que eso va a depender de su estatus migratorio. Si son residentes, pues tienen un límite de 6 meses que pueden pasar fuera del territorio de los Estados Unidos. Si son ciudadanos, pues pueden entrar y salir cuando quieran y no tienen que estar esperando o tienen que ir corriendo esos 6 meses. Altagracia se beneficia de tener trabajo y su casa en Puerto Rico, al igual que sus hijos, pero en Santo Domingo tiene el resto de su familia y es su tierra. ¿Por qué tiene que dejar uno de los dos? Y es bien interesante porque el hijo de Altagracia, que ella lo pudo pedir, como se dice, él decidió cuando cumplió la mayoría de edad irse a la República Dominicana. O sea que la persona que se había criado toda su vida decidió volver a Estados Unidos, así que esto es lo que provoca es que analicemos, ¿verdad?, las segundas generaciones de migrantes, a ver cómo se desarrollan estas prácticas transnacionales y estas nociones de hogar. La música y la memoria nos pueden ayudar a ver nuevas nociones de la migración y dentro de estas las nociones de retorno. Sobre estos temas queda pendiente ver otras memorias que pongan otras perspectivas de retorno y contrastarlas con las memorias de Altagracia. Y la pregunta es, pero ¿cómo utilizamos estas investigaciones y fuentes como estas en el proceso de enseñanza en el salón de clases? Pues yo no soy maestra, pero estuve analizando cómo se podría traer este tema de la migración, la raza y las nociones de retorno, y se me ocurrió, pues quizás lo vi de una manera macro, que serían 10 lecciones en donde se discutieran estos conceptos y los estudiantes también estuvieran expuestos no solamente a fuentes primarias, sino a hacer trabajo de campo fuera del salón de clase. Los maestros pueden integrar a su curso un módulo que cubra la migración e identidad, en donde los estudiantes se adentran al tema a través de varias tareas. El módulo se podría componer de 10 clases o se puede ajustar al tiempo que posee el profesor. El objetivo de este módulo es que los estudiantes conozcan y comprendan los conceptos de raza, etnia y nacionalismo, a la vez que trabajan con fuentes primarias de información. Estas fuentes serían la historia y las entrevistas orales, la música y también se podría incluir el cine. De una manera dinámica, los estudiantes aprenderán los conceptos y podrán identificarlos en la música y en el cine. Además, los estudiantes desarrollarán técnicas de investigación como la entrevista oral y la experiencia también de transcribir. Por último, investigarán fuera de clases, poniéndose al campo de investigación social y reforzarán las destrezas de trabajo en grupo. Así que sería que primero se le presenta, ¿verdad?, de modo teórico y lógicamente adecuado para las edades, los conceptos raza, etnia, nacionalismo y vinculados directo a la migración. Sí, también se podría traer más al contexto de Puerto Rico, qué grupos migratorios habitan la isla, cuál es su historia, y en los Estados Unidos, y que el proyecto, como el gran proyecto, sería pues que los estudiantes puedan hacer una entrevista oral, ya sea un familiar, un amigo, un vecino que sea migrante, y que eso lo puedan presentar al final de la clase. Y para concluir, quiero decir que las políticas inmigratorias empleadas por el gobierno de los Estados Unidos, que afectan a Puerto Rico porque está bajo las leyes federales, y lógicamente Estados Unidos, demuestran que como sociedad no entendemos la migración, que es un proceso, una práctica común entre los seres humanos y específicamente aquí en el Caribe. La educación es una de las formas de entender este fenómeno social y una herramienta de cambio importante, y creo que es indispensable que en el 2019 nosotros conozcamos qué es la migración y qué implica, que es algo natural en todos los seres humanos. Gracias.
Bueno, muchas gracias a Glorimari y a nuestras demás ponentes por este interesante panel que nos han brindado en esta tarde. A continuación abrimos el espacio para las preguntas del público.
Muchísimas gracias a las tres por este panel tan fascinante. Thank you to the three of you for such fascinating presentations, really provocative. Que de verdad tiene muchos puntos de contacto realmente fascinantes. So I have brief questions or suggestions for further development for each one of you. So Cheryl, your presentation really raises our awareness about the specificity, about the context, the situation of Cambodian Americans, and you very thoughtfully focused on the personal experiences of people who for the most part have committed minor infractions. But at least in the Central American case, it has been widely discussed about how it's not simply the injustice carried out against a person, but the impact of having some people who are very much criminals go back to their countries and actually destabilize social networks of the country of origin or the country they are sent to frame it differently. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that, if there's any sense at all that in addition to being challenging for the deported people, that they are potentially creating a destabilizing situation in Cambodia. For Marisol, fue fascinante ver los dos videos que pusiste, porque en el primer video, ¿verdad? Como puertorriqueño oyendo a un grupo de argentinos hablar, lo que más sorprendía, ¿verdad? Lo que transmitía la calidad de ser argentino era el idioma, la manera de hablar, el acento, el lenguaje, el uso de los verbos. Entonces, como puertorriqueños, pues estábamos presenciando un grupo de argentinos que eran afrodescendientes, pero que incuestionablemente hablaban como argentinos. Entonces, como yo decía, pero es que son argentinos, pues si hablan como argentinos, son argentinos. El segundo video nos demuestra las limitaciones del lenguaje, porque entonces de repente tenemos a personas afroargentinas que hablan como afroargentinos, pero nos están describiendo su exclusión y marginación social. Entonces, que a pesar de que hablan igual, posiblemente igual que las otras personas, eso no es suficiente. Entonces, quería ver si podías hablar un poquito sobre eso. Y la tercera pregunta es para Glorimari. Hoy y ayer hemos tenido varias presentaciones sobre afrodescendencia y marginalización en base de raza. Entonces, tú señalaste como primer paso de tu módulo educativo una discusión sobre las razas, pero quería saber si podías hablar un poco más sobre las exclusiones de la comunidad migratoria dominicana en Puerto Rico en base a afrodescendencia o percepciones de raza, y cómo la raza y la afrodescendencia forma parte de tu análisis de la experiencia migratoria dominicana, al menos en Puerto Rico y posiblemente también en Estados Unidos o en otros lugares como Europa, donde efectivamente los dominicanos también están muy estigmatizados.
Hello? Okay. Thank you, Larry, for that question. I don't know if I can answer it completely, but I mean, the way that I took your question is, what are their personal experiences after being deported to Cambodia? And definitely the local people in Cambodia do not accept them. They don't think of them as Cambodians. They don't speak or read and write the language. We spoke about this yesterday. They have a different style. They dress differently. They're taller. They're bigger. They have tattoos. And so in terms of destabilizing the country, I mean, they're just not really accepted. And so many of them, again, kind of turn to a life of crime because it's hard for them to get jobs. And a few of them, again, commit crimes, have trouble finding employment, making a living. and just having linguistic, cultural issues. They grew up in the US, they're Americans, and to be forced to a country, a culture that they're not used to is very difficult for them. And from the local people's point of view, they're also wondering, why is Cambodia accepting these criminals? You know, they don't know what type of crimes these people committed in the US. Why would we accept them into our country? Maybe they're going to, again, live a life of crime in Cambodia as well. But I don't know if that answers your question completely, but these are kind of like the two angles that I had in mind when you asked. Thank you.
Gracias, Larry. Y súper interesante, gracias. Y realmente creo que tenés razón, y algo que me parece muy importante para pensar esa idea de que vos hablabas del acento y de cómo no pueden ser pensados como argentinos, es justamente la relación que hay con el proceso de invisibilización del que fueron y aún son parte, en el que estos diferentes grupos no pueden ser, pueden ser pensados de alguna manera como argentinos, pero no pueden ser pensados como afroargentinos. Es decir, esa parte de la descendencia africana no puede estar asociado al que sean argentinos. Y por un motivo, como uno de los motivos es también como la cuestión como visual, o sea, que muchos de quienes son actualmente afroargentinos, digamos fenotípicamente, no tienen rasgos que puedan relacionarlos como afrodescendientes realmente. Entonces no van a ser pensados como afrodescendientes, no, pero si vos parecés igual que esta otra persona. Y a la vez también la idea de qué es ser o qué significa para la mayoría como de la sociedad argentina pensar a otra persona como un negro, que es una asociación a una cuestión de clase y cultural y no a una cuestión, digamos, fenotípica o de color de piel. Entonces que estos grupos, por eso fue muy importante el 2001 y la Conferencia de Durban, para empezar como a identificarse como afrodescendientes y no solamente como negros, por la cuestión de la asociación de que si alguien va a ser pensado como un negro es una persona pobre, una persona que no posee determinados como comportamientos culturales aceptables y demás. Entonces es siempre esa tensión de estos grupos por hacerse visibles y por cambiar la idea que tiene la mayoría de la sociedad argentina sobre qué es ser afrodescendiente y qué puede ser ser negro también en Argentina. Por eso, por ejemplo, algo que ocurrió en el 2010 fue la primera vez que se incluyó desde antes del fines del siglo XIX, que se había eliminado de los censos la pregunta de si la persona se consideraba afrodescendiente. Cuando se hizo en el 2010, salió un porcentaje ínfimo, súper bajo, que los grupos afrodescendientes realmente no compartían, porque lo que existía entre la mayoría de las personas era un desconocimiento de qué significaba ser afrodescendiente, o cómo alguien puede pensarse, sí, tengo descendientes africanos o de esclavizados. Ahora en el 2020 va a haber un nuevo censo y se están incluyendo otras categorías, no solo afrodescendientes, sino negro o que tenía antepasados esclavizados, y trabajar un poco más en esa como educación de la sociedad en lo que significa ser afrodescendiente o que una persona puede identificarse como negro. Bueno, gracias.
La primera pregunta era relacionada a las exclusiones que enfrenta la comunidad dominicana aquí en Puerto Rico. Yo creo que esa exclusión se da desde distintos ángulos, y para empezar voy a empezar por la disciplina en la que estoy, desde la historiografía. Básicamente, a pesar de que aquí viven alrededor de cerca de 500,000 de dominicanos entre nacionalizados o indocumentados, no hay una historia de los dominicanos en Puerto Rico tal cual desde la historia. Por ejemplo, tenemos los casos, tenemos el Centro de la Mujer Dominicana que lleva años ayudando a víctimas, a mujeres migrantes víctimas de violencia doméstica, donde casi tienen que rogarle por fondos al Estado, ¿verdad? Lo podemos ver eso también en las redadas que se daban en mi periodo de estudio. Aquí en los 80, 90, 2000, la policía intervenía, vehículos como guaguas públicas, para coger dominicanos y llevárselos deportados. Quizás esto ahora en el 2019 no se ve tanto, pero sí tiene sus rezagos en otra cosa. Hace quizás 2 años yo vi en el paseo de Diego, aquí cerca de la universidad, que decía algo de muerte a los dominicanos, o decía algo relacionado a los dominicanos. También hace 10 años, 15 años, había otro mural que decía muerte a los dominicanos, que está reseñado por Carlos Pavón y Yolanda Martínez San Miguel. Así que todavía los dominicanos, a pesar de que aunque nos comemos un mofongo quizás hecho por un dominicano, siguen siendo marginados. Yo no trabajo raza en mi tesis, porque es un tema para mí bien complicado. Yo soy segunda generación de migrantes dominicanos y para mí eso es bien complicado, así que no lo trabajo. ¿Cómo yo lo podría trabajar en el salón de clases? Pues precisamente yo escogería artículos de periódicos en los cuales, como ese que salía del mural de muerte a los dominicanos y todo eso lo traería al salón de clases. Y a base de eso, de que, ¿verdad?, ver primero cómo ellos se sienten con esa fotografía, ese mural, y que de vez ahí se traen esos conceptos y se reflexionan en clase. De esa es la forma que lo había visto. Y pues en términos raciales, yo pienso que aquí, como en República Dominicana el haitiano quizás es ese otro y ese otro más negro, pues para aquí nosotros en Puerto Rico, pues ese dominicano, no para todo el mundo, para muchas personas, pues ese otro más negro que nosotros. Y en términos de raza, yo creo que eso continúa, aunque esté desdibujado o debajo de la alfombra.
Bueno, muchísimas gracias. Infortunadamente se nos acabó el tiempo. Es momento ya de dar por terminado este panel y nuestro simposio. Mi nombre es Carolina Tovar, soy estudiante del programa graduado de Historia, y a nombre de la Universidad de Puerto Rico, recinto de Río Piedras, quiero darles las gracias por su participación. Son ustedes muy amables.
Okay, everyone, I've just passed out a document that you'll be using for the next panel.
Soy de la Facultad de Educación en la Universidad de Michigan y estoy trabajando con las presentaciones para ayudarles a pensar en cómo formar un currículo, unas lecciones. Del año pasado ya tenemos 6 lecciones como una unidad de currículo en el Internet, y de este simposio vamos a poner unos 9 o 10 lecciones en el Internet para los maestros que pueden utilizar. So I'm just describing the broad frames of the work that I'm doing. So what I want to talk briefly about is, if we take all the ideas that were shared today and we begin to think about how in the world do we begin to package them and break them down for high school students, that's sort of the framework. I'm going to talk through a little bit of the process of how we do that and just give you one brief example of the kind of activity we might develop. Voy a hablar brevemente sobre cómo podemos organizar todos esos temas y ideas en un currículo, ¿no? Sobre el nacionalismo. So all sort of based on this idea of nationalism, very, very broad. So I'm going to talk a little bit about a framework for instructional design, problem and project-based learning. I'm going to talk a little bit about, I'm just going to go through these. You don't need to read this. So big picture, pedagogical frameworks. So you may be familiar with the work of Paulo Freire, maybe not, but Paulo Freire basically said there's two ways of thinking about education. There's the banking model, which is where students are like, knowledge gets deposited into them, and then when they need it, they take it back out and offer it back up. So it's very transmittory, it's all about transmission, and it's not super effective. So el modelo de Paulo Freire dijo que el modelo convencional de educación es como de banco, donde la sabiduría está depositado en los mentes de los estudiantes. A better model is problem-posing education, educación de problemas, de preguntas. The teacher, and this is a quote from Paulo Freire that's worth reading quickly. The teacher is no longer merely the one who teaches, but one who is himself taught in dialogue with the students, who in turn, while being taught, also teach. They become jointly responsible for a process in which all grow. People teach each other, mediated by the world. The students, no longer docile listeners, are now critical co-investigators in dialogue with the teachers. Básicamente que los estudiantes y los maestros están aprendiendo juntos, están investigando el mundo en cooperación. So that's the big idea. That's kind of what we want to work towards. So how do we do that is kind of the question. We were going to do that, but we'll skip it. So one way to think about it is project-based learning. And in project-based learning, the framework, a lot of people think about, oh, we have kids do a cool project, like they make a poster, and that's project-based learning. But there's way more involved in project-based learning. So el aprendizaje basado en un proyecto es mucho más que un proyecto, no es todo un proceso. So we begin with a problem or a question. And so, for instance, if I think a little bit about, I'll take Cheryl's presentation that she just did. It's really about this idea of exclusion, of how government policy is used to both bring people but then keep them out. It's about immigration. So we begin talking and thinking about this problem, and we begin to identify what's the real problem that students would identify. And it has to do with immigration, but it also has to do with this question of who belongs. Who do we let in? Who do we keep out? And how do governments use policy to do that, right? That's a big question that we can answer or ask about any time period in history, right? Es una pregunta que podemos usar para cualquier época de historia. ¿Quién pertenece a la nación y quién se queda fuera? ¿Quién permitido entrar y quién no, right? So who do we let in? Who do we keep out? That's a historical question. And then we use this as a case study, right? So we begin framing a problem, a broad problem, and then we shrink it down to a case study question. Then we have to develop sustained inquiry. So I don't want to give students information, just tell them. I want to give them sources. So to get sustained inquiry, I need to develop some data, some texts, and things like that they're going to engage with. So entonces, necesito empezar un proceso de preguntar con los estudiantes que dura, ¿no? Que no solamente es una pregunta y una respuesta, algo más prolongada. And it's got to be authentic. So it's got to be a question that somebody actually cares about. It has to be a question or a problem that exists in the world and that people are trying to solve. Un problema que en verdad existe en el mundo y que a alguien le importa y que alguien en verdad está tratando de resolverlo. It's not just for the sake of learning, like it actually matters. Tiene importancia en el mundo. And then students need voice and choice. There's got to be a process of critique and revision. There needs to be a public product. Their knowledge learned has to be shared, because if it just stays within that classroom, then it actually doesn't have much import, right? So we're building in cycles of learning that do this. This is really hard work to do well, right? But that's why curriculum design takes a lot of time and expertise. It's more than just a worksheet to build a process like this.
And this is for every single class or some specific classes?
Ideally, you would do it like this would be your approach, right? And so there are schools that are trying to move towards this, but our education system is not set up to promote it, so we're just doing it at small scale right now. Yeah, because our system, like to do this well, teachers would need more time and support and that they don't have. But right now, somebody like me, when I design curriculum, I try and use this framework, and then that makes it easier for the teacher to implement it. And I train teachers how to do this, right? But again, it's really hard work. Pero ese proceso es bien complicado y bien largo y bien difícil, y las escuelas hoy en día no están estructuradas para apoyarlo. Entonces tratamos de hacerlo en un nivel básico, en un nivel de entrada. So that's kind of the big picture of So the big idea is it's problem-driven. It's not topic-driven. I'm not studying a topic. I'm solving a problem. It's inquiry-based with real-world applications. It's teaching and learning then that emphasize thinking, knowledge construction, not delivery, engagement in dialogue, connection to the world, and collaboration in the development of community. Entonces, basado en problemas y preguntas, en el mundo real, aprendizaje, instrucción con un énfasis en pensamiento, construcción de sabiduría, diálogo, conexión con el mundo y colaboración. So those are the big things. So the question is like, how do you do this? So you do backwards design. So the first thing is I have my problem. I think about my problem, el problema, la pregunta, and then I think about what are my desired results? What do I want students to actually understand? I start at the end. Empiezo al final. Right? Diseño al revés. I don't start at the beginning. I start at my final product, mi producto final. What do I want students to understand? That's my goals, my big ideas. And then I think about how are they going to show it? Right? So what's the task? What's the product? ¿Qué va a pasar al final? ¿Cómo van a demostrar lo que han aprendido? Only then do I start planning the activities. Right? So first I have to know where I'm heading, and then I build the roadmap to get there. Necesito mi destinación, y con la destinación ya hago el mapa. So that's kind of backwards design. So again, you start with this big, so when I meet with these guys, right, the first thing we talk about, well, what's your question, what's your problem, what do you want students to understand? 6 months from now, a year from now, if you run into somebody who went through your lesson, what would you really want them to remember? What would be the big takeaways, right, the big conceptual understandings? So we think about that first. We think about how they're going to show it, what that product is going to be, and then we have to build the steps to get them there. All this is also, we think about disciplinary literacy, how knowledge is constructed through text or through media, not just text. You frame a problem, you work with data, you use and produce multiple texts, you question, you summarize, you synthesize, you examine, you evaluate, you communicate knowledge, and you go back to a problem. All of your work, all of your disciplinary work follows this cycle. And if I were talking to a room full of scientists or mathematicians, then we might use different terms, but their work would follow this cycle as well. So what we want to do is make that cycle visible to students and give them an entry point into the students. So really quickly, I'm going to skip by these. So we think about scaffolds too, supports, como, no sé cómo decir scaffold en español, apoyo, ¿no? Okay, yeah. Entonces, ¿cómo se puede apoyar el aprendizaje, right? How do we, so if I'm working with texts, some of your data and your texts are really complex. So what I want to do is build in a helper, a scaffold, a support that as students get more experience and they get better at working with, I take away, right? So some of the graphic organizers that we saw, so the images and things like that, those are scaffolds that help provide that structure. So for instance, so in Marisol's lesson, we're going to talk about students producing their own account, right? They're going to maybe go out and create their own media production about identity, but they're going to need some scaffolds if they've never done that before. So what we would do is build in some guiding questions. So scaffolds then are just these tools, herramientas se puede decir, ¿no? Para ayudarles a ir paso por paso, building that knowledge, and you remove them over time. So one way to think about it is when you're introducing new information to somebody who doesn't know that or new skills, you model it. I do it. Then we do it together. Then they do it together as a group, and then they're ready to do it alone. So if you're teaching a new form of analysis, this is one way to do it. You do a think aloud, you model it, then you have the class do it together as a whole group. Then they do it in small groups, and at that point, it's called gradual release of responsibility. You release that responsibility, and they do it on their own, right? Entonces se empieza con un modelo, yo voy a hacerlo para enseñarles, después lo hacemos como un grupo, después en grupos chiquitos, y después se puede hacerlo independiente, right? So it's a gradual release of responsibility. That's what we do when we think of scaffolding. So what might this look like? If I'm thinking about this topic, nationalism, for a group of 9th grade students, 9th grade students are often very literal. They're very detail focused. They work well with visuals, and they need to work on critical analysis. They're used to just fact regurgitation, most 9th graders, because that's what they've gotten. But I want them to think about nationalism and racial and ethnic identities. I want them to think about your case studies. But I can't do that if they don't even understand what nationalism is. And nationalism is really hard to understand, right? They need concrete, historical, and contemporary examples. They're going to need to take notes to develop graphic organizers. They need to engage in reflective writing, maybe argumentation. There's a lot of work that they have to do to understand this stuff. So I've got to figure out how to step back and introduce all this, which is what I'm doing with the first lesson in the unit that will introduce your lessons, will help set the stage for this. So I want to think them about the literacy practices, the scaffolds, how they're going to work in groups independently, and how they're going to demonstrate their learning. Think about problems we might frame, some of these big problem statements. How do marginalized groups resist nationalism that seeks to silence them or make their struggles invisible? So in the case of Egypt, right? So we've got this nationalist rhetoric, right? McCarm's presentation. And there's this marginalized group that is being told that they're part of the conversation, but they're really not. And this nationalist rhetoric is really, so that would be a great case study for that question. But then how do marginalized groups use nationalism to claim a place at the table? It would be another thing. How do you demand entry into the nation? In any national context, who's defining national identity and who is challenging that power? These are good questions that some of your lessons fit into, right? And we can talk about modifying them, but creating a set of questions then that students answer with different case studies becomes the powerful tool. But first, they need to understand what nationalism is. So you each have a piece of paper, right? Everybody has a piece of paper that has a little quote or speech thing on it. All right, so take a minute and read it. And here's what I'm going to tell you what you're going to do first. Each sheet of paper provides an example of a statement or description of nationalism. I have yet to define nationalism for you. I want to go make visible the steps I'm taking. There's no definition of nationalism yet. You just have a description or an example of nationalism. So read it. Then you're going to get up, you're going to walk around after you've read it, and you're going to find two people who have a different example. You're going to find two people. So hay que leer su ejemplo y encontrar dos personas que tienen ejemplos diferentes. Right? You form a group of 3 people. And then you're just going to compare your text. What do they have in common? What characteristics does this example share? Y después van a comparar sus ejemplos. ¿Qué características comparten? And based on this, what do you think are the ingredients of nationalism? The necessary attributes. Based on, if you have 3 examples of nationalism, what do they all have? Right? Entonces, van a compartir y comparar sus ejemplos y basado en esta discusión, ¿qué son los ingredientes de nacionalismo? Las características importantes basado en esos ejemplos diferentes. So take like 3 minutes and read, and then get up and find 2 other people and have a quick discussion. All right, quit reading like graduate students and just a quick read. Don't do a full analysis. You can have more than 3 people in a group, it's okay. You can have 4 or 5, whatever. Just get in a group and compare. Ya, compartir y compara. ¿Cómo están parecidos? ¿Qué tienen en común?
El discurso que va a terminar de la historia de cuando ganó la presidencia. ¿Y qué dice? Pues el mío es cuando él vino el discurso de Donald Trump en las Naciones Unidas diciendo que Estados Unidos no tiene que participar en la Corte Internacional de Justicia porque ningún país tiene el derecho de decirle a Estados Unidos qué está bien y qué está mal y que por lo tanto él se va a retirar, va a retirar a Estados Unidos del International Criminal Court, de la Corte Internacional de Justicia. Y pues yo me quedé impactado y horrorizado cuando leí esto. Hay que decir lo que uno... ¿qué característica? ¿Qué característica comparte? ¿Y cuál tú tienes?
Literalmente nos han robado los trabajos, hay que traerlos de vuelta a Estados Unidos. Recuerda que el trabajo se los robó un robot, pero nadie se lo quita. Y sobre todo there will be no more 50 million bailouts of terrible socialists who their most come from Mexico City.
No, pero también está bien cómico lo que te dice, we start looking out for these American first, que es bien parecido al discurso que usó Donald Trump para ganar la elección.
¿Y cuál tú tienes?
Y yo lo mismo de izquierda, sí, pero el primero es feliz y segundo es nacionalismo, el país primero.
O sea, que todos estos discursos son sobre autoritarismo, nacionalismo de hombres heterosexuales, del grupo dominante de su país, hindú en la India, bueno, hindú es una religión, pero bueno, de un grupo dominante, ¿verdad? Y estos hombres declarando que su país ellos van a mandar y que su país es el que tiene razón.
¿Quién no es parte de? All right, so once you've compared, now try and come up with a list of like some basic characteristics. Based on these shared examples, what are the characteristics that must exist for something to be an example of nationalism?
Autoritarismo, o sea, y que su meta no es la colaboración o la cooperación internacional, sino privilegiar exclusivamente al país, pero también que no es cualquier persona del país, son hombres
Que pertenecen a un grupo particular dominante.
hombres de un grupo dominante, casi heterosexuales, del grupo racial religioso dominante, patriarcal.
Y aquí, a pesar de que dice que aquí en Brasil hay de todo, nativos o no, pero lo que dicen que bajo ningún forma esto van muriendo, ¿verdad? Y van a disfrutar de las libertades que hoy pueden ir y venir. Caminar las calles en este país, libertad de hacer negocios, política y religiosa. Pero que antes de la libertad política y religiosa, la libertad de hacer negocios. Como un poquito. Pero al final es que lo dice exactamente
Pues que como estos ejemplos son bien contemporáneos, son neoliberales.
Okay, let's, just to move along, let's just, everybody, you can just sit where you're at or go back to your seat and we'll kind of hear out about different conversations. Vamos a procesarlo. So we'll...
It's a very traumatic exercise, and you've given us very bad documents.
Why?
Because they're painful and violent.
Yes. Well, this is nationalism, right? Now, the other thing to remember is that this is a group of highly educated, very intellectual people who are going to overthink everything. So if you're doing this with a group, and we have lots of prior knowledge, whereas if you were to give this to high school students, they would need much more support, and they would not have the vast, deep prior knowledge that this group has. So this is, if I was designing it for this group, I would actually do it differently. But it's okay. But what made this challenging were the examples, in a sense, right? But they're also different. So, but what are some of the characteristics? What has to exist for there to be for something to be an example of nationalism? Let's just start over here and we'll kind of go around. What did you guys identify?
So we wrote down, shared feelings, attitudes, belonging, material symbols like national flag.
Okay, so symbols, belonging.
Yeah. Material infrastructure, money, currency, idea of in-group and out-group.
Okay, belonging and not belonging. All right, another group. What did you guys identify?
Exclusionary discourse.
Okay.
And then things like authoritarian discourse or Larry especially said privilege of country over international institutions.
What about you guys in the back there? Yeah.
We also talk about that and this idea of singularity or difference, why specific group or territory is different. And we talked also about the idea of sovereignty and not being under the dominion of another group.
So did anybody read the example from Curtis about the Kurds? You had, so a few of you had that. Which stands out against, how is that different than some of the other examples?
Well, it's an example of an aspiration towards creating a state based on a pre-existing nationalism.
So it's aspirational nationalism. So not everybody had that article. So the characteristics we pull out are different based on what sources that we have. And that's why you have to process it as a whole group and make sure that all the ideas get heard. So it's not Kurdistan, it's Kurds in Iraq, I believe. Really different example because they don't actually have a nation per se, but they want one. And so that becomes the aspirational nationalism that is about a group that is currently excluded wanting in or wanting to create their own in, right? So then we complicate the discussion a little bit more. So if we're doing this with students, I would do an exercise like this. Depending on the level of students, I might have to create more basic examples. Dependiendo del nivel de los estudiantes, se puede utilizar diferentes ejemplos. But what I would do next would be to get the PowerPoint working again. Is it timeout? There we go. Is I would then put out what scholars have identified as generally recognized. This is from somebody else, right? So valuing a collective identity based on history, language, race, and or ethnicity, believing that a certain group of people is bonded to one another because of a shared identity, placing loyalty to a defined nation above loyalty to other groups or individual interests, or making political claims on behalf of a defined nation. And what I would express to students is that this isn't the definition, this is a definition. So working with high school students, it's super important to even pay attention to our use of definite articles, right? This is not the definition of nationalism, it is a definition. No es la definición, es una definición. Super important, small difference in words, but we want them to understand that words are complicated. Then I might show them a non-example, and I have them try to figure out, is this an example or a non-example? What is this? And here we have, this, I'll briefly translate the highlighted part. This is from a speech by Fidel Castro, or is it, yeah, Fidel. And he says, we have a sacred patriotic mission, but also a sacred internationalist mission. So then I would have students wrestle with that. Well, is that nationalist? Is it something else? What would you call that? Is it internationalist? Is it globalist? Is it both? Because clearly within here is a nationalist message, a Cuban nationalist message. But nationalism in Cuba is really different because they also have an international presence and a very international focus. Less so now perhaps, but there was an international mission, right? Cuban doctors go all over the world and provide medical services. It's very different than what happens in the United States, where doctors do that, but as part of charitable work, you know, with private organizations. The U.S. government barely does that, but it's a mission of the Cuban government. So is that nationalist? Is it internationalist? What does that mean? How do we fit this into this framework? So we give them examples and non-examples. So basically that's just a snapshot. I'm going to talk through very briefly about how you would actually do this. And this works, by the way, with any level of learner. This is great for college classes if you're teaching a complex concept. Se puede utilizarlo para cualquier nivel de aprendizaje en la universidad también. So it's called concept development. It's how do we develop desarrollo de conceptos, no? And this is based on work by other people. I don't claim this. I want to credit Bob Bain, actually, at University of Michigan, does a lot of this work. But this particular approach is based on an article by Lauren Harris and Tammy Schreiner, who are students of Bob's at Michigan. The link is there. It's a really good article, and I just adapted their framework, so I did not come up with this at all and take no claim on it. But students at University of Michigan in our School of Education learn how to do these lessons in the social studies. So you start off, you select a concept that's foundational to your discipline. So we've got globalization, colonization, nationalism, identity, gender. We've had lots of great examples. Entonces hay que empezar con seleccionando un concepto que es importante a su disciplina, ¿no? And something that represents a pattern that's an important concept. Like, you can't participate in your discipline if you don't have a good understanding of this concept. Those are the level of concepts. And we differentiate concept and vocabulary. A concept is something messy that doesn't have just one meaning. There's vocabulary that you give me a definition and I'm good to go. The problem in education now is that we treat a lot of concepts like they're vocabulary. Like, nationalism is something I can give you one definition and you're good to go. And that's a disservice to students because it's super complicated. Entonces hay conceptos y hay vocabulario. Hay palabras que necesitan una definición y palabras que representan conceptos bien complicados, que son necesitan más tiempo y más trabajo para entender. So what you would do is you'd select a concept. Colonization would be a good one. And then you look at multiple sources. You find 6 different definitions. Hay que encontrar 6 definiciones diferentes. You look at a bunch of different definitions. You gather them. And from those, you identify core traits, ingredients of the concepts, the characteristics of that concept. And then you develop a set of examples, 3, 4, I had 7, probably too many. You get several examples. A primary source, this could be music, an image. It all depends on your concept, right? And many of the data sources that were shared today could be used in this. So a map, I mean, just depends on your concept, but you don't want to think small. Entonces hay que encontrar ejemplos del concepto. Pueden ser un documento primario, puede ser una imagen, una canción. And you begin to gather them. And then you gather a set of non-examples, no ejemplos, ¿no? O ejemplos al contrario. You develop another set. And then you implement. And to implement, you name the concept, but you don't explain it. We're going to look at nationalism today. We're going to look at gender. We're going to look at colonies and colonization. You don't explain it. Then you might, we spent all day talking about nationalism, so I skipped this step. But you would just say, hey, what do you guys know about this concept? ¿Qué ya saben de ese concepto? Para ustedes, ¿qué quiere decir esa palabra? So I might say, when I say nationalism, you say, and then you finish the sentence. What does this mean to you? So we surface prior knowledge, misconceptions, but we don't spend a lot of time clearing them up. We just surface what's already known. And then I give out my examples, and I say, all right, put them in groups, facilitate them talking, and identify what do they have in common. And if what they have in common then becomes our list of ingredients. And so I put chart paper up all over the room, and I'd have students moving around, reading each other's charts, and they'd be writing down the key attributes for these examples. What characteristics do they share? ¿Cuáles características comparten? No? So they'll develop this list. And then we discuss it. We come up with a shared list maybe. We're going to record these. Then we're going to look at the characteristics identified by scholars that we just did. We don't have to accept what the scholars said if we don't like it. We can be scholars ourselves and push back and debate and reform and adapt their ideas, right? It's a good opportunity for students to have some agency. And we develop a set of criteria across the two, across what experts have said and what we have said. Entonces comparan los que han dicho los expertos con lo que nosotros hemos formado y creamos una síntesis. We have our own synthesized version. And then we get more examples. Then you give them more examples. You give them maybe 5, 6 examples, some of which are non-examples and some of which are examples, but you don't tell them which is which. And they have to use this new set of criteria to figure out, is this an example or no? And then they have a deeper understanding of what this concept means and doesn't mean in different situations. You think about something like nationalism, it's very complicated. So, if I was teaching them about nationalism, it might be, well, what is nationalism? These might be some of our questions that we're framing. What role is nationalism playing in different contemporary conflicts and issues? What are race and ethnicity? How are they different? How do race and ethnicity connect to nationalism? What can we learn about race, ethnicity, and nationalism from case studies of conflict across time and space? These will be some of the questions framing the unit that comes out of this symposium. So here's different, and now we get even more definitions. Advocacy of or support for the political independence of a particular nation or people. Very different definition, right, than some of the ones we were getting. But if you go down to the bottom, today the word is often associated with the far-right racist ideologies of white nationalists. So nationalism has this problematic history. And we would teach students about the history of it. It really is dating back to the 17th century, in scholarship at least, talking more about the uprisings in the 18th century that produced American and French nationalism. It's sort of when kids learn about World War I, nationalism is one of the key causes of World War I. So it's associated with World War I. It's associated with racism. So that's really interesting. And we'll revisit this in a second, looking at some other examples, because it gets really confusing for students when they learn this, and then they learn about something like Puerto Rican nationalism or black nationalism, which have very different connotations. So the word, depending on the political context, means really different things, right? So students have to understand that a word can have a lot of different meanings. So here's just some examples of images related to nationalism. Of patriotism versus nationalism, a little political cartoon. There's Steve Bannon down there on the bottom with the frog meme. So that's part of the discourse right now. This is, political cartoon. Nationalism is an infantile disease. It is the measles of mankind. These are all sort of a particular. Here's one from a historical example. This is has relevance today, right? What is this saying? What is this suggesting? Let's do a quick interpretation. It says, this is from World War II era. It says the League of Nations, the strings represent the League of Nations, the predecessor to the United Nations. What's happening? Go ahead, somebody call it out. We've got. Yeah, the poor U.S. is being pulled in all these different directions. Oh, just a victim. Yeah, it's very nationalist. This is America first. This is Donald Trump, right? But he certainly didn't invent it. This dates all the way back to almost 100 years. about this idea of isolationism, and they're pulling us in too many different directions. We need to resist that. But this is where it gets complicated, right, when we think about nationalism. Because these ideas are similar, kind of, but they're really, really different. So nationalism gets used, you know, Malcolm X is associated with nationalism, but these guys over here are associated with nationalism too. So what's different? And so it's really important to help students to use these kinds of examples to push them off against each other so that students begin to question a term like nationalism and ask whose nationalism, in what political context, who's out of power, who's in power, who's trying to claim and who's trying to keep people out, because nationalism is kind of a two-way street, right? And there's critiques of black nationalism and critiques of all different forms of nationalism that we don't have time to analyze. But again, just this idea that if we're working with high school students and they hear the word nationalism, they're going to hear it in these vastly different contexts. And to understand that, you need a lot of historical knowledge. So when we're developing educational materials, we need to take our time and not just assume that people will be able to disentangle the meaning of a term like nationalism and really dig deep in these different examples and have a discussion. What's different between Malcolm X's ideology of black nationalism, and that changed over time, right, to what these guys probably think based on that picture, with the people marching in Charlottesville. It's a very different kind of nationalism. And then we have nationalism in our local context here. You know, the term nationalists in Puerto Rico has a very again, a completely different meaning. So how do we help students here in Puerto Rico understand nationalism in the United States compared to nationalism in Puerto Rico, where they're very different tendencies. There's something there that makes it nationalist, but they're really different too, because nationalism exists in a historical context and requires background knowledge. So beginning to present students with examples like this becomes important for them to begin to ask, what's the difference? What's similar, but what's the difference? What's happening? Who's in power, who's not in power, and who's pushing back? This is just a great quote. That Puerto Rico has the unusual, maybe unique case of the cultural and ethnic and political aspect of the community don't divide. So if you define nationalism as, there's a definition from Ciapera here, the ideology proposition that the ethnic and political community should coincide. And then this is just from a blog post. It was just an interesting way to figure these things out. And these aren't good examples, bad examples. They're examples that are out there in the world of people talking about nationalism. Some of them are hugely problematic. Some of them are empowering. But they become just really interesting things for students to think about. A different definition. Nationalism is the idea that a nation, a group of people with a shared history, culture, or language is entitled to self-rule in an independent state. So not all nationalism is the same. Not all uses of the word carry the same meaning. Then we would throw out, these are just some non-examples. Here we've got a statement from Japan talking about Japan's determination to join other countries in the Paris Accords, a very international statement. The European Union, Europe will never be a fortress turning its back on the world. Europe is not an island. It will champion multilateralism, from a European Union Prime Minister's speech. Very different than the things that Donald Trump is saying. So hugely, really nice, easy, clear non-example. Going back to Fidel Castro and some of the Cuban rhetoric. Some fun popular culture examples. So over here we've got Bomba Estéreo, Somos los Originales, Super Internacionales, Calle 13, the song Latinoamérica, Residente's whole documentary. So if you guys, especially from U of M, haven't, go on Netflix and look up Residente and watch his documentary. He follows his DNA around the world and does a musical tour of the whole world following. It's really interesting. Anyways, but it's very internationalist and not nationalist. But you could do Residente in Calle 13 and find examples of Puerto Rican nationalism in his lyrics, and then also lyrics that are really international. So there's a lot of cool popular culture examples of both rhetorics of nationalist, globalist, and internationalist that you can engage kids with. Big picture is that students need opportunities and examples like this to build complex conceptual knowledge through dialogue. I'll just go through these really fast. Race and ethnicity would make really good things. You know, why are these races, ethnicities, and nationalities, and who's labeling these things? Throwing out, this is just worth, this is the U.S. Census Bureau's definition of race and ethnicity, and it is so wrong and so problematic, right? Look at ethnicity. That's the U.S. Census's definition of ethnicity. Isn't that crazy? But so putting this in front of students becomes really important so that they can question these definitions alongside other definitions. Because then if we go back and we've got these definitions, much more complex than what the U.S. Census data is doing. This is from the government of Australia. So Australia says it is difficult to say a person belongs to a specific race because there are so many variations. It is considered to be a social construct. Definitely problematizing things a little bit more. Not a perfect explanation, but certainly better than this. Anyway, so putting these, and then you can give historical examples. This is racial categories from South Africa in 1950. These are the criteria that were used to distinguish white from colored in South Africa. You got race definitions of race in Brazil in 2010. So when you put these examples in front of students, like different countries define race in different ways, becomes a powerful lesson for them. And many young people have never even considered that race could be defined differently in different places. Images, this is the Pantone project where this photographers in National Geographic created a color wheel of people just to show that how color is actually quite meaningless as a definer of race, and that race, again, a social construct. And there are hundreds of these images that you can engage with, and it's just matched with this whole Pantone of images from light to dark, but then you start breaking it down and it really doesn't define race. It's just people are all over the place. So there's a lot of fun work that you can do. Frere models are just a really nice, simple way for students to recognize, to break down concepts. What's a definition? What are examples? What are characteristics and what are non-examples? These are called Frere models, and so you would have students fill those out. You put them up all over the room. Anyways, so that's that. So, because what we want is students to be able to engage with all of these things. So, race and so Colin Kaepernick in the United States, that whole conflict, you know, he's the football player who's was while he was still in the NFL, taking a knee during the national anthem. That's all about nationalism and race. I mean, that's like a really interesting example. But, you know, you've got Germany anti-immigrant sentiments and racism under the nationalist rhetoric, but we've also got independence for Catalonia and Spain. So nationalism and race and ethnicity are all over the place in the world right now and become really important things for students to understand. So we want to design lessons that engage students with problems and interesting case studies. When we teach about big concepts, we want to first make sure students actually understand the concepts and build their understanding with lots of messy, complicated examples. Students need to consider multiple examples and non-examples and look at different understandings or nuances of a concept. And issues of identity and power have to be analyzed when relevant. There are certain sort of more concepts that aren't about humans, right, that are less tied to power and politics. But really anything having to do with society and people and culture is tied up in issues of power and agency and needs to be deconstructed that way. Whose definition at what point in time and what context. And that's all I have to say for that. And I'll just say this, anybody who wants to talk more about this and get more examples of what this looks like, you just email me and then we'll talk. Yep.
So basically, that's it. Thanks to everybody that came these 2 days. I think it was super productive. I wanna mention quickly special thanks to Gilberto Mojica and everybody at CRED, those guys that you saw coming in and helping with the computers, or the one doing the live broadcasts, even getting us chairs and tables and everything that we needed. So, and they've been collaborating with us for many years now. So there are special allies here. So I wanted to publicly thank them. Thanks to not only the presenters, but even especially the moderators. Wendy Cosme, Carolina Tovar, Belmari Rivera, Pablo Pantoja, who helped with us. Thanks to Alana and everybody at LAX and VII for everything. Maybe see some of you next year.
Yes. Well, thank you to Juan. This is truly a collaborative project. It's not just in the name, it's in practice. Thank you to everybody in Ann Arbor who's watching. I know we have people watching from, again, I'm going to name the centers, I'm going to get them right this time. The Center for Middle Eastern and North African Studies, Center for Southeast Asian Studies, the Center for South Asian Studies, Latin American Caribbean Studies, Lieberthal Rogel Center for Chinese Studies, the Center for Japanese Studies, and the NAM Center for Korean Studies. So those are all of the centers that have provided funding with our Title VI National Resource Center grants from the U.S. Department of Education. So again, very grateful to have all of this support. Thank you all for being here for these past 2 days. We look forward to continuing this project next year. Adios. Okay, our fans are waiting for us, so we're going to try to move about it as soon as we can. We have dinner reservations at 7. That's by the time you're ready to get a table. We'll meet in the lobby at 6:50 and walk together. Okay. That works?
That was funny. Windy, ¿tú vienes esta noche? Sí, lo conozco. Ah, wow. ¿Tú vas a estar allí? Bueno, pues déjame ver, como estás un poco cansado, pues mañana sí, no estoy tan callejero como en otras ocasiones, pero te lo agradezco. No, y anoche hubo un evento en el local y la gente, los drag kings de Puerto Rico, la gente también me escribía para conocer. No, pero he visto fotos. Sí, eso es allí, eso es latino. Y me han dicho que es muy bueno. Entonces no te vuelvo a ver a menos que te vaya a arrancar. ¿Tú vas a la escena? Ah, pues te veo en la escena. Ok, cómo no. Mira.
Okay.